Hello, my friend. I hear you want to learn English while you become a U.S. citizen. Congratulations. I am a volunteer tutor. You can call me Paul Reviewer. I volunteer because I don't believe one should have to pay to learn the rudimentary rules of a language one really has to learn in order to assimilate into a country. Now, you obviously speak some English, so I won't go into really simple stuff such as letters, their sounds, and vowels compared to consonants, since you seem to have that grasp. So, I am here to teach you these basic lessons that everyone should know. Now, we won't go into really deep and confusing rules because there are professional English teachers that could teach you better than I could. But I will go into these simple rules. And the main rule is what makes a sentence a sentence. An English sentence requires three things. One, it must have a noun. This would be called the subject. Two, it must have a verb. And three, it must express a complete thought. Honestly, it isn't that different from the rules of other Romantic languages, those being Spanish, French, Italian, and some other Western languages. One thing that makes English unique, however, and therefore confusing to anyone who wants to learn English as a second language, is the fact that English speaks backwards. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I'll give you an example. One of the restaurants I went to while I was young and raised in Los Angeles, California, was called El Pollo Loco, which translates from Spanish literally to the chicken crazy in English. Now, here in English, we say our descriptions backwards, where we would actually translate it to the crazy chicken, or El Loco Pollo as a literal Spanish translation. That's just something to keep in mind, is that English does speak backwards. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into those three things I mentioned as to what makes a sentence. Lesson 1 are nouns. Now, nouns are a person, a place, a thing, or an idea, and these are the subjects of any sentence. You cannot have a sentence without one of these. A person would be like me, Paul. A place would be like Los Angeles, or even home. A thing would be like ball, and an idea would be, say, like love. Lesson 2, verbs. For generally, verbs are the action of a sentence. For instance, like the dog ran. The dog is the subject, and ran is the verb. Ran or running is an action. Or the boy dug the hole. The boy would be subject, and dug would be the action. He's digging the hole. He dug the hole. He digs the hole. A verb is an action. And lesson 3, a complete thought. Now this is a little confusing. The only time you will really be judged as to what a complete thought is or not is when you're doing an essay for an English course, and it sometimes will differ between teachers as to what they consider a complete thought. I'll give you a couple of examples. In the Bible, there is a verse that simply says Jesus wept. Jesus is the subject, and wept is the verb. And that really does express complete thought. Jesus wept. He wept. There really doesn't need to be anything else. However, sometimes a sentence can have both a noun and a verb and not be complete. For instance, if I were to say the dog ran after, that would not be a complete sentence. The dog ran after what? Of course, if I said the dog ran, that would be a complete thought because it doesn't leave anything. Basically, A, a complete thought is a sentence that does not leave anything to interpretation. The Jesus wept does not leave any interpretation, as the timing doesn't matter. The dog ran, that also doesn't matter because it doesn't give any time or specifics. The dog just ran. However, the dog ran after is a fragment because it does not state a complete thought. Like I said, the dog ran after what or who. Like I said, the rule for that is a little confusing, but you won't really that really isn't something you run into in speech, and the only time you will really run into that problem is in English courses. So, and by that point, when you're into English courses, there have teachers, you can ask teachers directly what they would consider any of this. Alright, now I will discuss to you the other parts of speech that you should know. Now, a good segue from our complete thought lesson is lesson 4, the different types of verbs. And there are really 3 main types of verbs. We have the action verbs, like I discussed to you earlier, is basically verbs that express action, like the baby smiles at her parents. Smile is an action. The next type is the helping verb, and these are verbs that generally appear with other verbs to form what they would call complete verbs. They would generally indicate tenses, like past tenses, future tenses, etc. Like an example would be, I should have taken the earlier flight to Chicago. The helping verbs would be should have. Like, for instance, a present form of that sentence and verb would be, I took the earlier flight to Chicago. Should have taken gives more context to time, and that's basically what helping verbs are for. They are there to give context to tenses. There are a few helping verbs, such as may, do, does, have, am, were, been, been. Basically, if it connects to a verb, it is a helping verb. Now, not all things that might sound like it's helping it are helping verbs. The big one is negatives. Negatives such as no, never, not, hardly, scarcely, etc. Well, not etc., but, are not helping verbs because negatives simply are not helping verbs. For instance, the sentence, he has never gone fishing with me. The helping verb is has, and the verb is gone, has gone. Never is not a is not a helping verb and is not part of that structure. Just like she is not singing in the choir this year. Is singing is the verb. Is the complete verb. Is being the helping verb, and singing being the action verb. Not is not part of that. I don't really remember what those are called, but negatives are not part of helping verbs. And we will come back to helping verbs later. And then the third type are linking verbs. These are also called state of being verbs. These are verbs that connect or link a subject to another word or words that describes or renames the subject. Like, for instance, the coat feels rough and scratchy. Feels would be the state of being verb. These are important because technically, like feel and is are not actions. Like, the boy is sad. Well, the subject is obviously boy. Well, the verb can't be the, that's nothing. And sad is describing the boy. It's not an action. So the verb is the verb. Yeah, if you follow that. Basically, if you don't see an action, the verb will end up being a state of being verb. Common state of being verbs would be am, is, are, was, were, being, been. Senses can also be action verbs. State of being verbs such as look, sound, taste, smell, and feel, or any of those equivalents. And even some and many conditions such as seem, appear, and become are also linking verbs. Alright, so did you get all that? I know it can be a little confusing, but we can go over it again if we need to. Alright, you got it all down? Good. Here we go, lesson 5, pronouns. Well, do you remember what a noun is? Okay, good. Pronouns are basically used to take the place of a noun. For instance, with people, you would use like he or she. It would depend on the gender of the person, but like for instance, you could say David took out the trash, and then David took the bin to the curb. That's a bit messy. Instead, you would use a pronoun in the place of one of David's to make it a bit cleaner. You would say David took out the trash, then he took the garbage can to the curb. And for females, it'd be Emily rehearsed her dance, then Emily performed her dance. Like I said, I'm just coming off the top of my head. Instead, you would say Emily practiced her dance, then she performed her dance. Pronouns can also be for multiple people. Like David and Brittany bought their tickets, and David and Brittany boarded the flight. Instead, you would say David and Brittany bought tickets, and they boarded their flight. Like I said, that's maybe a little clumsy, but I'm coming up with that off the top of my head. But basically, pronouns are used to take the place of nouns, and it doesn't have to be just people. For instance, you could say the Empire State Building is one of the largest buildings in America. It stands however many feet tall. It would be the pronoun, because you don't want to say the Empire State Building again. So, that's really it. It takes the place of a noun. Now, there is a little bit of debate as to how pronouns are used. Like in my college, we have an unofficial rule where generally, if you're unsure of the gender of a person, you would just say he. But now people are going to say they because there's a big debate among people as to which pronouns you should use because it's considered sexist language. I know that might be a little confusing because again, English is quite unique. As you probably know, in like Spanish, there's gendered language. El is considered masculine, and la is considered feminine. Like el pollo loco is the masculine, and generally things that end in a or a is feminine. In English, we don't really have that. Instead, we have pronouns to do that, and I believe Spanish does too. So, like I said, it's just something really confusing that's going on in English for some reason. But you generally won't have to worry about that. Alright, now on to adjectives. Adjectives are simply describing words. Like for instance, like I said earlier, the boy is sad. Well, boy is the subject. Is the verb, state of being verb, and sad is the adjective. It is describing boy. The boy is sad. You could say the dog ran fast. Ran would be the verb, dog would be the subject noun, and fast would be the adjective. It is describing the dog. Dog is fast. Again, adjectives can be a little confusing because it's like if it's a really long sentence, which I can't really think of right now, it'd be like, okay, what's describing what? And then we get into lesson 7, adverbs. Adverbs are basically like things that describe verbs. They're basically things that, yeah, I guess describe verbs. Generally, they end in ly. For instance, you could say that the girl sang loudly. Well, loudly is describing how she sang, and sing is a verb. So, generally, if you're having trouble finding the adverb, look for something that ends in ly. And if you're confused as to how that is compared to an adjective, think about the sentence, the pretty girl sang loudly. The subject is girl. The verb, the action, is sang. Pretty is describing the girl. And loudly is describing how she sang. So let's go over that one more time. The pretty girl sang loudly. You have your subject, noun, girl. That is what the sentence is about. Noun is person, place, or thing. Sang is your verb. A sentence must have a verb. And a verb is generally either an action or state of being. In this case, it's an action. Singing is indeed an action. Pretty is an adjective. It is describing a quality of the girl. And loudly is an adverb describing the quality of the verb sang. Alright? You got all that? Good. I know it can be a little confusing, but once you get it down, it's not really that confusing. The part of English that really gets confusing is when you go into some really weird rules. Like, for instance, the thing that really confused me are like phrases. Once you get into that, then you're into serious English. So you have gerunds and infinitives, participles, like some really weird stuff. But unless you like take some really unless you take like an intense English course, you won't really have to worry about that. Now, generally, like I know some English teachers do quizzes on that. One of mine actually did, and it was a little annoying, but some don't, and they don't really affect your score that much. So it's like knowing those those more advanced rules isn't necessary to speaking it. And basic writing. And that's really all that you really need to know, but since I have you here, there are two other lessons that I personally believe are important because you will use them fairly often. And lesson 8 would be conjunctions. Conjunctions will typically connect two sentences together. And I believe I use an example like that too. For instance, it could be like, David took out the trash, and after he did that, he took the garbage bin to the curb. The conjunction is and, because you have David took out the trash. That's one complete thought. And then the second one would be, after that, he took the can to the curb. A lot of times you will take two sentences and combine them into one just to make it a little smoother. In speech, it's really not that important, but in writing, even basic writing, that is important, because if you write it down, and conjunction does look better. The conjunctions off the top of my head are that are common is and, but, or, there, and sometimes you have nor as well. That would be a negative conjunction. We should not get that confused with prepositions such as about, between, because, etc. That's something totally different. But conjunctions, by definition, combine two sentences together, two independent sentences together. There's generally, just a heads up, there are two main types of clauses you should know: an independent clause and a dependent clause. An independent clause can stand alone as a sentence, and a dependent one can't. Conjunctions are used to combine independent clauses. Um, and like I said, when it comes to clauses, you get into things like compound and complex, and it's just really a mess. And we won't go over that here, but if you go deep into English, you will. And the last lesson we're talking about today are your types of sentences and the punctuations. Now, there are several punctuations, but I'll go through the main three in detail. There, for your declarative and imperative sentences, you have the period, and you probably seen this in things like Spanish as well. The period simply ends a sentence. A declarative sentence is something that states something. Anything like the apple is red. That's declarative. It's declaring something. An imperative is generally a command, like go take out the trash, and it ends with a period. The one thing about imperative sentences that you probably want to remember is that the implied the implied subject is you. Go take out the trash. Generally, when I take a quiz and I have to identify the subject, I generally have to put in parentheses you, because it's you, go take out the trash. Or Paul, go take out the trash. An imperative simply gives a command. Then there's the question mark. These end interrogative sentences. And as one knows, question marks ends questions. An interrogative sentence is something that asks a question, like how tall is the Empire State Building? You end that with a question mark. In English, you only use one question mark. I believe in Spanish, for instance, you have an upside down question mark at the beginning. I believe that. Yeah, I believe that's the case. And then last but not least, we have the exclamatory sentence. These end with a exclamation point. Now, these don't necessarily have to be complete sentences. Like for instance, the song "Hark, the Herald Angel Sings." It's hark, exclamation point, the herald angel sings. When you begin a sentence with a like a yell or something like that, or some kind of motion, you end that word with a exclamation point. Like yippee, we won the game. It would be yippee, exclamation point, we won the game, period. Now, an exclamatory sentence would be something like, what a wonderful invention, exclamation point. In that case, that's not a question because it's not really asking anything. It's just simply stating that whatever this invention is wonderful. Generally, you will not have to use those. At least in my experience, those type of sentences are frowned upon in like academic writing, but in like freestyle writing or novel writing, they are used a lot, and they're technically correct. They're technically correct parts of sentences. Now that's all I really wanted to go over. I think that if you can memorize all of this, then you really have everything you need to know with you. English is a pretty confusing language, and the only reason I guess, I don't want to say become a savant, but remember a lot of these rules is because I've had them beaten into me over the years. Now, I was homeschooled, and I'm not sure how curriculum is in public schools, but in my homeschool, year after year, we just repeated these rules, and now they're impossible to forget. I wrote these rules freehand out of memory, and they're all correct. So, I hope that these help you, and I really hope you go well in your journey. So, thank you for coming. If you ever need help, or if you want to go into more detailed rules, you know to find me. Anyway, thank you very much. Goodbye, and God bless.